Hey everybody, this is Bob Long, your anatomy and physiology professor. This video is for my Part 2 biology class, Biology 2402, or Human Anatomy and Physiology 2. We've already gone over all this material, but this is a quick review because we are taking a quiz pretty soon online. As you guys know, the COVID-19 or coronavirus outbreak has pretty much moved all colleges and universities to an online format temporarily. So I'm trying to review my students to be ready for their quizzes. There'll be some quizzes forthcoming, but I wanted to review this information. So this is going to be blood flow through the heart. You guys have a handout on this that I gave previously, and we went over this in laboratory, but it's really mostly for lecture. I've already done a series of lectures that I've given you links to for blood. I didn't make those videos. I borrowed someone else's, but they were public property, so whatever. And there's a worksheet you guys need to work through to start preparing for a blood quiz. This is going to help prepare you for part of a heart quiz. We're going to draw blood flow through the heart. In order for people to understand that, what you have to do is, in order for me to make sense of it, I take a little human being and cut them right around heart level of the chest. Have the arms coming up, the head and neck. I'm not interested in making a really neat, pretty drawing. I'm interested in getting a concept across right now. And then here's the lower half of the body. Essentially, as blood is pumped from the heart out to all the peripheral tissues to supply oxygen, the cells pick up carbon dioxide and return blood back to the heart. Some people will say that arteries carry oxygenated blood and veins carry deoxygenated blood. That is mostly true. What I like to remember is, for people to remember, is that arteries carry blood away from the heart. The A in artery is for the A in artery is for away, and veins return blood back to the heart. So we're going to draw the two largest veins of the body. And the reason I do it this way is to demonstrate that blood returning from about heart level in the chest, from the upper limbs, the neck and head area, is all going to drain back towards the heart through this large vessel. And blood coming from the legs, the lower limbs, the abdomen, the abdominal region, the pelvic region, all those organs is largely going to drain back through this vessel. And then what we're going to do is we're going to try to draw the heart, what's called a mechanical heart, like this. Draw a little box that these connect to, and draw a little opening in the bottom with 3 flaps. And then we're going to draw another box, a little bit bigger. It's going to extend further over, and it's going to come out with a large pipe or large vessel that's going to go off to the lungs. Okay? And as blood passes from the heart to the lungs, we will release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and absorb oxygen. By the way, there's a little valve at the base of this structure. The protein that's in red blood cells called hemoglobin not only is a protein that binds oxygen and some carbon dioxide, it's a pigment, which means it's going to absorb photons of light of different wavelengths. And essentially, when oxygen is bound to hemoglobin, its three-dimensional conformation changes a little, and it absorbs a lot of light in most of the wavelengths except for that in red, and a lot of the red is reflected out towards your eyeball. That's why oxygenated blood appears very bright red. When carbon dioxide is bound to hemoglobin, it changes its conformation again, and it will absorb different photons of light and reflect those in sort of the bluish green, which is why our veins in our arms look kind of a blue-green or cyanic color, C-Y-A-N-I-C, cyanic. Cyanosis is the turning blue. And which is essentially what cyanide does. The toxin cyanide prevents oxygen from binding to your red blood cells. You die, you suffocate to death, and you turn blue, cyanosis, hence the name. Anyway, so whenever I use the red marker, it's going to signify oxygenated blood. The blue color is going to signify deoxygenated blood. As blood hits the lungs, it changes color, and it's going to return back to the heart. Now, mind you, this is a mechanical heart. It's not 100% anatomically correct. It's to get a concept across, which is the idea of how blood flows through the heart. So on the other side, on the left side of the heart, remember this is the patient or the subject's right and left. So this would be the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart over here. I'm going to draw this like this. Draw a pipe coming out here with some little flaps as well. And then I'm only going to draw 2 openings, but in reality there would be 4 over here. And I'm going to close off this little box. This flap has 3 cusps. This flap only has 2 cusps. These are the heart valves called the right atrioventricular or AV valve, which has 3 flaps, also called the tricuspid valve. The flaps are cusp-shaped, kind of like cupping your hand, which will allow them to catch blood and close when the ventricles contract. And then this valve is called the bicuspid valve. It's the left atrioventricular valve, left AV valve. Bicuspid valve, also referred to as the mitral valve. If you've ever heard of mitral valve prolapse, that's when the valve fails and a person can die. They need a valve replacement. So now, I'm going to draw these 2 blood vessels coming off from the lungs, joining in over here. It's not going to be a perfect drawing, but you guys get the idea. And I didn't draw that very well now, did I? It's okay, I'm going to erase this. But I'm going to connect these 2 vessels here, which are going to be returning blood back to the heart from the lungs. Again, it's a mechanical picture. It is not designed to be anatomically correct per se. Now this large pipe is going to cut in front of these, and it's going to deliver oxygen to all the body's organ systems. And that large pipe, as you guys would know, is going to run down this way as the aorta and have all the branches providing blood to all the parts of the body. Okay, so I'm going to number these structures and I'm going to go over them with you. So I like to number these 2 1A and 1B because they really are entering the heart at the same point. This is structure number 2, structure number 3, structure number 4. This is going to be 5, 6. These 2 pipes are going to be number 7. Your lungs represent are represented by the number 8. These 2 pipes are going to be number 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and then blood is going to come out and go to a certain set of structures. When I'm done with this, I'm going to have to erase a little bit of this. I used up all my marker board. I'm used to lecturing in a really big lecture hall, and we're having to improvise with all of this COVID stuff. So the red is going to represent oxygenated blood, and the blue is going to represent deoxygenated blood. And we're going to start with deoxygenated blood. We're going to start with blood returning to the heart. From everywhere up here, all of these areas, blood is going to be returning to the heart through these 2 large vessels. I've drawn the blood as blue so that you can realize that this is deoxygenated blood. As the blood enters the structure, 1A is going to be the superior vena cava. 1B is going to be the inferior vena cava. Those 2 vessels meet together at the right atrium. Structure number 2 is this big empty chamber here called the right atrium. As you should know, the 2 top chambers of the heart are called atria. The 2 bottom chambers are called ventricles. The ventricles are actually larger than the atria. Again, my picture is not to scale. It's to get the concept across of which direction blood flows. So as blood flows from the right atrium or into the right atrium, it begins filling up. And once it can, it will pass through the structure number 3, which is the tricuspid valve or the right atrioventricular valve, and begin filling the right ventricle with deoxygenated blood. So number 4 is the right ventricle. So we have the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, right atrium, the tricuspid valve, and the right ventricle. These are the structures in order that blood would flow into. Before I continue, know that the AV valves are almost like trap doors. If I had a trap door here that held, let's say 200 pounds, I'm only about 180. If I stood on that door, it would not open. If you started adding 5-pound weights to my hands, I'd go to 185, 190, 195, 200. And when I hit the 200, if you gave me another weight, boom, that trap door would fall open and I would fall through. That's kind of what happens. When the ventricles are contracted, blood is actually still filling the atria because there's no valve here. The same thing over here. And as that blood starts to build up, when the ventricles relax, as long as the pressure in the ventricle is higher than the atrium, that door is closed. But as soon as the blood, due to gravity, the pressure becomes greater than the pressure in the ventricle, the flaps fall open and blood begins filling the ventricles due to gravity. We fill them about 70% full due to gravity, and then the ventricles, the atria contract and top off the ventricles, filling them 100%. Then the ventricles contract. When the ventricles contract, these cusps are forced shut. We'll talk a little bit more about some other structures that help with that, called the papillary muscles and chordae tendineae. But again, this is about blood flow. So when the ventricle contracts, the blood will be forced up through here, through number 5, which is called the pulmonary valve, also called the pulmonary semilunar valve, because the flaps are semilunar shaped, or also called the right semilunar valve. Different books use different terminology. And as blood flows here, it pushes this valve open. That valve will prevent blood from falling back from the pulmonary trunk into the right ventricle. But when the ventricles contract, they only open in one direction. That will allow blood to flow through the pulmonary valve, through number 6, the pulmonary trunk, also called the pulmonary artery, that's the pulmonary trunk. And then it will flow through these two vessels, number 7, which is the pulmonary arteries. Now, each pulmonary artery will branch into smaller pulmonary arteries, and eventually it will take blood off to the lungs. As blood flows through the lungs, number 8, it will turn bright red. It's oxygenated now. We give off the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, take in oxygen, and then the blood is going to return to the heart through these two pipes here called the pulmonary veins. One of the things that I teach in my class is that arteries are red, veins are blue, except for the pulmonaries. The pulmonaries are always reversed because the pulmonary arteries carrying blood away from the heart are carrying deoxygenated blood, blue blood. The pulmonary veins returning back to the heart are carrying oxygenated blood. So usually arteries are red, veins are blue, except for the pulmonaries. That's where it changes. Now, as blood returns through number 9 here, the pulmonary veins, it begins to fill the left atrium, number 10. When the pressure in the left atrium becomes too great for the bicuspid valve or the left atrioventricular valve, number 11, to hold, it falls open, and then blood begins filling this chamber called the left ventricle. When the ventricle squeezes, the bicuspid valve is forced shut, and the blood is forced out, what we call the aortic valve, number 13 here, and goes out, up through the aorta, which is number 14, all the way out to number 15, to all organ systems. So the blood would head out the aorta here and head out to the head, to the arms, to the abdomen, to the pelvis, to the legs, to all your organ systems, respiratory, cardiovascular, nervous, digestive, urinary. It's going to supply oxygen to those tissues. As they consume the oxygen, the blood will take in some carbon dioxide and then return through the veins back through the 2 vena cavae. Superior vena cava, number 1A, inferior vena cava, 1B, into number 2 here, the right atrium. Blood then flows through the right atrioventricular valve, also called the tricuspid valve or right AV valve, into the right ventricle, number 4, then through number 5 here, which is the pulmonary semilunar valve or pulmonary valve, through the pulmonary trunk, out the pulmonary arteries, through the lungs, through the pulmonary veins, into the left atrium, through the bicuspid or left atrioventricular mitral valve, into the left ventricle, out the left ventricle through the through the aortic semilunar valve or the left semilunar valve, out the aorta to all organ systems. If you wanted to write these structures down, then we could do so. So, hopefully you have all this part down and you can see it. I'm going to erase a small part over here. And, well, I really don't have the room to do this, so I'm just going to leave it at this. I think you can get the structures down. I went through them several times throughout the video. I hope you understand blood flow through the heart and why the blood is deoxygenated in blue and oxygenated in red. Blood flow through the heart is essential. You'll be asked questions like, as blood exits the right atrium, what's the very next structure it would pass through? You have to be able to imagine that in your brain and say, okay, that would be the tricuspid valve, then the right ventricle. You should be able to rip through these 15 structures in order right off the top of your head. Superior and inferior vena cava, right ventricle, tricuspid valve. I'm sorry, that was a mistake. Superior and inferior vena cava, right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle, aortic valve. My goodness. I'm just screwing that up. Anyway, let's do it again. Superior and inferior vena cava, right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle, pulmonary valve, pulmonary trunk, pulmonary arteries, lungs, pulmonary veins, left atrium, bicuspid valve, left ventricle, aortic valve, out the aorta to all organ systems. And then it returns back to the heart. Okay? So, I'm not going to re-record this video even though I made that mistake, because doing these videos is not as easy as you think. So, they are very time consuming to get just right. So anyway, I hope you learned something. I hope you had some fun. And I hope this helps you review blood flow through the heart. Thanks a lot for watching.